So that's what we're hoping that will happen today. We're all going to sort of learn from each other. We try to organise the room in a way that is conducive to discussion, and then we've got lots of points for questions and answers, and then obviously the panel discussion at the end. So don't be shy, I think is what we're saying. And now we're going to move over to, I'm just getting distracted by the, to our next speaker, and I'm really sort of delighted to introduce Adrienne Burgess to you. Adrienne is the joint CEO of the Fatherhood Institute. Now, the Fatherhood Institute, Adrienne will correct me if I get any of this wrong, from your website though, and the Fatherhood Institute has a vision for a society that gives all children a strong and positive relationship with their father and any father figures. They support both mothers and fathers as earners and carers, and aim to pursue work which helps prepare boys and girls for a future shared role in caring for children. Adrienne herself is a very well-known expert on parenting and couple relationships. She's a leading authority on fatherhood and parenting and has written widely on the topic. Her work with the Fatherhood Institute has helped to set the agenda on fatherhood, and she's going to talk to you a bit about this. She's going to sort of chart the historical journey of how we arrived where we are today with shared parental leave and other related policies, and some of the challenges that remain in store for the UK. She's worked very hard to fit us into our schedule, and we're very grateful for her to that. I believe you're racing down to Westminster for this afternoon, so thank you very much for sort of letting us secure your contribution. And I'd like to offer you a warm welcome and thank you for talking to us today. Adrienne Burgess. Where do you get to hold the mic as well? It doesn't actually work to magnify the voice, it's more in terms of...
That's great. Can you all hear me at the back? Can you hear me at the back? That's great. Thank you very much. Who's going to change these slides? Or I can do that if you give me the clicker. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you. And thank you. I do have to go, not for any very exciting reason, but because some other organisation has set up a meeting for a few of us with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and you kind of feel you've got to go. You don't think you're going to achieve anything, especially in the day of Brexit when they can hardly do anything because they're so involved in their Brexit plans. But that's why I have to go. But I'm really sorry to miss the other speakers this afternoon, all of whose work I know really well and admire. Okay, so I was asked, I've got 40, no, what time do you want me to end now? Because we're a bit late, aren't we? 22, do you want me to?
You've got about 40 minutes.
As much as that? Okay. All right, that's great, lovely. Okay, so I've been asked here to talk really about the parenting leave design. So that's maternity leave, paternity leave, parental leave, in this country and how it evolved. But I think the story is quite interesting and tells you quite a lot about why we've got the design of leave that we have, which is so different from so many other countries. But I also thought I'd start, and we will conclude in looking a bit at what I'm going to ask you now in a bit more depth. Thought I'd start with asking you, what is maternity leave for? Yes? What's the main driver behind all the countries across the world having instituted some form of, except for America, some form of paid maternity, or some form of maternity leave generally paid? Yeah? To recover from the birth, yes? Infant feeding secondary, it's maternal health really. It has been maternal health, been recovery from the birth. Infant feeding has very mixed, because you've got very high rates in some countries where women do go back to work early. So it's not just infant feeding, it's mainly maternal health. Yes, that's right. So what's paternity leave for? Any idea? Why is it there? 2 weeks around the birth in many countries. What's that for? Support the mother. It's a maternal health leave. It's a maternal health leave, not a paternal health leave, maternal. So it's all about the health of the mother around the birth. Very laudable. Very laudable indeed. So what is parental leave for? Anyone want to venture an idea? How does it differ from paternity leave or maternity leave? Yes, it's more focused on the child. It's for the care of the child, yes, for the care of the child. So obviously when you have a long maternity leave, as in this country, mothers will use a lot of their leave for the care of the child because they've got over the birth. But in fact, the later leaves are really for the care of the child. Okay? So what is the entitlement in this country? Do we know? What's the entitlement to statutory? That means paid by the state. Statutory in this country, statutory maternity leave. What's the design? What is it? What do mums get? Right, 52 weeks leave, 39 weeks paid. How's that pay divided up?
First 6 weeks are 90% of their normal pay.
Yes.
The rest is effectively a statutory flat rate unless you're a very low paid worker.
That's right. So it's £139 something a week. So it's under the minimum wage, well under the minimum wage. Okay? So that's right. So that's it's probably one of the longest, if not the longest, lowest paid leave in Europe. It's a very weird arrangement, right? Very long, very low paid on the whole. Another interesting fact is that 90% that the mothers get for the first 6 weeks. Does anyone know why that's weird and an outlier in Europe? It's because it has no cap on it. By a cap, it means in most countries, if they give mothers or fathers a paid leave out of national insurance or the state, or however it's paid, they have a cap, which means that the highest paid workers don't get, say, 90% of their salary. So in Iceland, for example, they present the average wage, not the person's wage, but the average wage, and then they put a cap on it so that those earning above a certain amount won't get their full 90% of their salary. And the thinking behind that is not wrong, because in fact with very high value individuals who are actually earning a great deal of money, or a lot of money, their employers generally want to keep them. They'll probably top up the payment. They'll probably enhance the payment, right? So, but what we have in this country is no cap on that 90%, which means that the mother earning 300,000 gets back, her employer can claim back from the state 90% of her salary for that 6 weeks. And, you know, the woman who's earning very, very little, the same thing can happen. So that's an outlier. It's strange. Okay, so there's one other leave that British parents have. So we've got this thing called shared parental leave, which we'll talk about. We've got maternity leave, we've got paternity leave. What's the third leave they've got? Unpaid parental leave. And where does that come from? It's a European entitlement, okay? It's a European workforce directive. Every country should give 4 months per parent per child. 4 months per parent per child. So every father and mother in this country has an additional entitlement, additional to all our other entitlements, of 4 months until the child, I think, is 8. Is it 8? I think, something like that. What's interesting, of course, about that leave, well, 2 interesting things. Firstly, no one knows about it. I'm amazed that anyone in this room knew about it. Congratulations, and normally they don't. And secondly, it's completely unpaid. It's absolutely not talked about anywhere. I've never seen it in any advice to parents. But it is an individual right for a father. It protects his employment. He can't be sacked while he's on it. And each country is allowed to design within the constraints of the 4 months, can design it as they want and can pay it if they wish, and some do. We don't, and we design it so that the maximum that can be taken in any 1 year by a parent in relation to a child is 4 weeks. So that's the system we've got. So as you see, it's particularly for fathers, but actually also for mothers, very, very low paid. So I'm going to start us off thinking about where it came from. So first of all, there was this drive for maternity leave and pay. And that was the first thing, quite rightly, and that's historic. So that was introduced across Europe in the 1970s. And the maternity leave in 1975 was the first UK maternity leave legislation. But it was very, very restrictive employment criteria. So at the moment, it's a day one right. That means that if you join an employer and you get pregnant the next day, then you can be you're eligible. You can't go to that employer pregnant, but you can get pregnant after you've started work. Then it was very limited. Fewer than 50% of working women qualified. And in this country, as you probably know, paternity leave is not a day one right. It's a 6-month right. So a man has to be working for 6 months with the same employer before his partner becomes pregnant. Now, in 1974, Sweden did something really extraordinary. It introduced a cross-gender parental leave. It could be taken by either parent. And the story that I've heard around what was going to happen and what did happen in Sweden was that in 1974, they planned to have a reserved element for fathers and mothers that could not be transferred. It wasn't a share-as-you-will leave. It was a leave that reserved part of it for the father. In fact, I think it was going to be equal, non-transferable. And what happened on the night before they introduced it was that they changed it and they dropped that. But that was far-sighted to even think about it in 1974. They were thinking about how do we make the men take it or let the men take it in a strange way. So it was introduced. Nothing happened for about 20 years in Sweden. We'll go back on that one. Yes, until about 1994, about 20 years later, they did introduce the first daddy month in Sweden, the first reserved leave for fathers, that it was a leave. If he didn't use it, the family lost it. And it's that reserved leave that has changed the landscape, that changes the landscape in countries. So in 1988, we were castigated by Europe. Oh, that's a surprise. As the only member state not providing full statutory maternity leave. So we've been pretty weak on supporting even mothers. We had actually blocked the adoption of a draft directive setting out minimum standards on parental leave as well. So we were very, very reluctant in that arena. So, in 1999, the Labour government, mothers were granted 18 weeks paid leave, 6 at 90% pay, 12 at below the minimum wage. So that rate was established then. They had 18 weeks. Okay, 18 weeks, so that's just over 4 months, isn't it? It's about 4 full months. And then we got the unpaid parental leave, the European directive, which then was 3 months and now is 4. I used to write for COSMOPOLITAN magazine, and I remember this picture in the first discussion of parental leave that I ever saw in COSMOPOLITAN. And actually, as a writer on Cosmo, I can tell you we were never allowed to talk about children or parents because our readership was pre-parenthood. So we were not about that at all. We were about love and dating and all those things that Cosmo still is. But for some reason, this article got past the policy, and there was a whole article on parental leave. And that was the image they created. And it's a shocking image. Of course, it's a parody of that image that's been around since the 1970s of the beautiful young man holding the baby up, and he's got a naked torso. That's been a very strong image for the whole idea of involved fatherhood. A hairless man, the hairless Adonis, he's called. And here's the hairless Adonis again. And that was quite shocking because it was, what do we want? Are we trying to turn men into women? That was the thinking behind it. Now, 2003, the Fatherhood Institute, we were going by then, though we were called Fathers Direct, and one of our team, Tom Beardshaw, went into the government to negotiate around the parental leave system. He was one of the advisory group. Now, Tom had a degree in gender studies. His master's was in gender studies from the LSE. And Tom had a terrific grasp of gender. He understood gender both in terms of the way it related to women, which is normally, as we know, how the word gender is used, but also how it related to men, because we've been thinking about that a lot within the organisation. So Tom was really clued up. So, At that point, they introduced 2 weeks of paternity leave, the same that we've still got. So that was 2003, at below the minimum wage. So that means that the state, the employer can claim back from the state that £139.80 or whatever it is a week. So when we say it's statutory, in this country it means that the employer can claim it back. Similarly, the employer can claim back maternity leave, maternity pay from the state. So often they'll be claiming back quite a lot, because if the mother's quite high paid and she's been on 6 weeks at high pay, they'll claim back quite a lot. Claiming back, it's very hard to get very good data on how many men are taking paternity leave, statutory, because loads of employers don't even bother to claim it back from HMRC, and HMRC hold the data because they see the claimbacks. But it doesn't, HMRC themselves have said, it doesn't represent whatever percentage of men are taking paternity leave, because we know that loads of employers think, oh, do I have to fill out that paperwork just for 2 weeks at £139.80? I don't think so. So the data, we do have data on the take-up of paternity leave from big surveys, but we don't have it from HMRC. Now, what Tom said was that he sat in this negotiation, and the talk was, if we're going to give dads a couple of weeks, we'd better extend maternity leave. And he said, if you extend maternity leave, as they planned and as they did, to 52 weeks, you are doing women a huge disservice. This means that the mothers are absolutely defined as the carer, not just for 18 weeks, but for 52 weeks. And the fathers are being not defined as carers at all. They're just there to help the mum for a couple of weeks. And Tom said, don't you understand what you're doing? You are knifing women in the back. And they said, don't be ridiculous. But of course, that is what has happened. Because as we now know, women are hugely disadvantaged, not just in terms of pregnancy discrimination, which is rife, but by the fact that they've been out of the workforce for a couple of years, by the time they've had a couple of kids, forget it. Their seniority is compromised in almost all cases, not all, but in almost all cases forever. They are poorer in old age. And the workplaces remain absolutely unaffected because the men and the childless women, but the men in particular, aren't changing their work patterns much and aren't required to. So that 52 weeks maternity leave was actually a killer, if gender equality is your driver, and it is mine. I remember when it came out that men were going to have 2 weeks, there was a leader in the Times which said, men need paternity leave like fish need bicycles. Now, I think that if you think about the way parental leave has been talked about in the last couple of years, with the idea of parents sharing it and the research that's being done about how did you come to share and everything, that's a massive shift. No one would ever say anymore that men need parental or paternity leave like fish need bicycles. And that's a huge shift. So there has been an enormous shift because of the legislation. The legislation that brought in the paternity leave, even though it's so minimal, changed the national conversation. And there are various studies, some of which in my report will be out. I'm doing my chapter on work and family comes out for Nuffield Foundation at the end of May. And one of the findings is a study of doctors in the National Health Service. And you find the percentage that took up paternity leave. They were all taking leave around the births of their children. Of course they are. How is 90% of them at the births if they're not taking leave? They're taking leave, but what percentage are taking paternity leave is different. But what they found was that the men taking paternity leave rocketed from about 54% to 93%, these doctors in the National Health Service, after 2003. So that was an incredibly valuable leave entitlement, even though it was so small. So we have been campaigning quite a long time for this leave to be a leave for fathers that is an individual entitlement. Now, we know that there already is that European leave that we've talked about, the unpaid one. But we've been campaigning for a paid leave for fathers that is not an extended paternity leave. It's not to be taken as an extended time while dad's home with mum, even though some families might benefit from that. It's not that we're against that. But most important in our eyes is an element of reserved parental leave for fathers, which can be taken when the mother works, goes into training, whatever she does, for self-employed and employed alike, not this limited arrangement we've got now where only about a third of couples even qualify for this thing called shared parental leave, because it's really a transferable maternity leave. So we wanted that every man who qualified for paternity leave would qualify for parental leave. Doesn't matter what his partner's work history is. We've been claiming that because we know from the international research, and I'm sure you'll hear that this afternoon, that there are various elements that help men take the leave. One of them is that it is a reserved leave that if he doesn't take it, the family loses it. A use it or lose it leave. The second thing that's most important, of course, is that it's well paid. So just as a little health warning, Iceland introduced a very good system in 2000, and then there came the economic, and they have 3 months for mum, 3 months for dad, and 3 months for the family to share as they will. 3 months for mum, 3 months for dad, 3 months for the family to share as they will. And they pay it at a certain percentage of the average wage, which will disadvantage men on the whole because they normally earn more than women. But what they did after the crash in Iceland was that they dropped the pay level for those leaves. And the men's take-up of days in Iceland, after that cut in the remuneration, dropped from 100 days. They were on average taking 100 days, which is quite a lot, dropped down to 87 days. So Iceland's now doing an interesting thing. So then, as things started to improve in Iceland, they had this debate. Well, what will we do now? Will we change the design of the parenting leave system, which, as I said, was 3 months mum, 3 months dad, 3 months 3 months to share as you will? Or they said, will we increase the remuneration, take it back up again? And they decided to do that. They increased the remuneration, and the dad's hours are going up again. But the other thing they have done is to have held very influential committees, and they now have a proposal. I don't know whether it's actually a promise, target, whatever it is. It's something pretty big, that by 2022, they will have the level of remuneration up, and they will have 5 months for mum, reserved for mummy, in the first year. The first year is crucial. 5 months for mum, reserved. If she doesn't use it, they lose it, the family. 5 months for dad. If he doesn't use it, the family loses it. And 2 months to share as you will, which means the mother can take 7 months in the first year, well paid, and the father takes 5. And if he doesn't use his 5 or she doesn't use her 5, it's not transferable. Iceland also has a very strong objective to, by 2022, to have eliminated the gender wage gap. So they're doing this all hand in hand. They're doing everything, and they're bringing in nursery care from 18 months, I think from 12 months. So the parents will then have a good childcare entitlement after 12 months. So we said to government, as we've been going for this, we've been saying, for fathers to have well-paid leave in the first year is what families want. There is no doubt about it is what families want. It seems very sensible to people. It seems fair. There's a fairness question there. People say, well, it's fair. And they mean fair to mums and fair to dads, that he should have this leave. We said it's what families are already doing. They're struggling to combine the work and care. So especially in families with lower incomes who can't buy in care, the fathers are doing more care than in families where the care can be bought in. I'm going to get a drink of water. Thank you. So we said that, and we also said The UK is way behind other comparable countries, and then we published a document called the Fairness in Families Index, which charts that. It's on our website. We also said, if you give fathers good leave, well-paid leave, more mothers will go back to work earlier. Mothers will go back to work earlier, sorry. And more highly qualified women will stay in employment and national productivity will rise. It's been estimated in Sweden that for every month of leave that a father takes, his partner's income increases by 7%. Yes? So there's a real equality thing in there. We also said when fathers take more leave, couple relationships are more stable, which is true. And when fathers don't take leave, this is linked with developmental problems in their children. There is UK research to back up all this. So we said to them, that's what has to happen, surely. Surely the priority has to be to give some leave to fathers. And out came the 2011 Modern Workplaces proposal. And it was brilliant. It outlined the Nordic model, what we'd call the Nordic model, where there was reserved, well-paid leave for fathers for a period. They thought that was very important. The Daddy Month. It was defeated through the consultation. It's the first time I've seen a government way ahead of the population. It was offering something that was transformative and that everybody now realizes was ideal, but at the time it was scuppered. And not just, as you might explain, by employers. It was scuppered by a coalition of voluntary organizations working in the field who were very much led by one particular organization who argued that mothers should have the complete right to the leave, because if mothers didn't have the leave and to transfer to the father when she wanted, if this father had this thing called an individual right, he would be forcing his partner back to work so that he could look after the children. He would be, so they kind of made up extraordinary stories that have not been found to be the case all over Europe, and they defeated the bill. The Green Paper. So the government then came out with the watered-down version of the thing they now call shared parental leave, which they tried their best to promote through gritted teeth, because the department knew it wouldn't work. But it was all they could do. They'd put out in Modern Workplaces, they had to put out some kind of leave. So what we have at the moment is, as you know, this thing called shared parental leave, which is transferable maternity leave. So only when both the mother and the father qualify as employees with good employment records, only when they both qualify can the mother transfer some of her leave to the father. So as Jonathan said in his introduction, if one of them is self-employed, take it out of the equation. If one of them works for the gig economy, take it out of the equation. So then we come to, they had no reserved leave, non-transferable for the dads. There was no reason for the dad to take it unless the mother really didn't want to take it or couldn't take it. But there was no benefit in him taking it, because if anyone was likely to be topping up or enhancing the pay, it was the people for maternity leave. Very few employers, as far as we know, enhance parental pay for parental leave. So the chances of the men taking it, I'm amazed that any have taken it, really. But the good thing was that, unlike in a lot of the Nordic countries, this leave had to be taken in the first year. Why is it so important that fathers take leave in the first year? Anyone got any idea? Yes, set the pattern. Pattern of caring, that's right, because when the fathers take leave alone, they become more confident as carers, and the more they become confident, the happier they are to do it. And when they go back to work, they tend to retain taking quite a lot of responsibility, and their working hours drop slightly, and their and their hands-on care of children remains substantial. So it sees the mother through. If you're just looking at it from the woman's point of view, which I often do, it sees the mother through. She's not always the one going to be called from the school later on. So that's one of the reasons why it's important in the first year for the father to take some of the leave. What else? Yes. It does. It allows the mother to go back to work in many cases, because families don't worry so much about handing their babies over to other care, childminders, nurseries, grandparents, when they're a year plus. So that if you don't get the father taking some of the leave in the first year, you just might skip him altogether, because by 12 months, we've got a nice childminder around the corner. Yes? So that's why the first year is very important. And we do have that in our system, so that's a good thing. So they promoted it. We didn't attack them. We knew they'd tried as hard as they possibly could. We let it ride. But also then Nick Clegg stepped up to the plate. He was devastated by what had happened. And he said, okay, we the government, the federal employer, the government, we are going to pay equally parental leave. If we enhance it for mothers, we're going to enhance it for fathers too. So what he tried to do was to incentivize by money, if you like. Some major employers, as we know, have followed suit. They like to stand up and say, we're great, we offer 6 months to every father, 6 months to every mother, and it's paid at full salary, we're the best. We don't really know what percentage of those do it. We don't know, we don't have really good data on enhancement of pay, not even that good a data on enhancement of paternity pay, let alone enhancement of parental pay. So there's no reliable data on that. If you're thinking about an employer, and an employer wanted to get men to take parental leave and pay, what would the employer have to do? What steps would the employer have to take to get men in their workforce take up parental leave and pay? So what would be the first thing they'd have to do? Yes, they'd have to enhance the pay to reflect the wage, both of mothers and fathers, right? So they'd have to be enhancing. And as I said, some of these companies say, we're doing it, we're paying 100%, we're great. What else would they have to do? So they have to get the policy right, okay? Yes? Publicize the policy. So how would they do that? How would could an employer publicize it? Well, take it themselves is one thing, but yes, but you don't have to do that. More important, lots of the people at the top of the organisation will not be having children at that stage. So I think take it yourselves is a bit of a...
Publicity campaigns internally through their network groups, through whatever they've got set up to get their policies out within their business.
Yes, absolutely. On their website first would be a good thing. I mean, I don't know if ever you've done this. I'm sure Jonathan has. I've looked, on company websites to find. I looked at the LSE got some award that Working Families had given it for being good for yeah. I'm not blaming Working Families. They actually had quite good policies. Working Families were completely right. But when I looked it up on their website, even in the year when they won it, it wasn't on the website, right? So that's really important. I was up with last week or a couple of weeks ago in Scotland with Sam Pringle. Where is she? There she is at the back, working Fathers Network Scotland. And there was an academic sitting beside me who works for Edinburgh University and who took paternity leave a few years ago, not long, 4 or 5 years. And he was told by his employer, Edinburgh University, that he couldn't have 2 weeks. He could only have 1. That's all the university allowed. The fact that it's a statutory 2 weeks that apparently passed them by, they topped his salary up for the first week to 100%. But he was given completely inaccurate information. Now, I would have to check back and see if he had not simply misunderstood. But he was very clear that that's what he'd been told, and he was no fool. So, part of publicising is getting it right and getting it up there, and then so that when people are applying for jobs, we can see whether they have looked for it. And then there would be very interesting questions to ask in recruitment. So you see whether they've noticed this. This would help an employer understand whether their policies were helping them recruit the brightest and the best. So I would really like to see that. Even if they keep that data secret, which of course is what actually happens, nevertheless, if I were doing an audit with a company, I would be looking to see whether they were collecting that data by gender. By gender, yes? So getting the policies right and publicizing them. And that has to be a continual, ongoing thing. It's not just, like the government did with shared parental leave. We've got this big burst now, we're going to publicize it. It means constantly reinforcing, very visible everywhere. In anything you send out when people are applying for a job, it needs to be in there, so that the whole organization knows. What else do you have to do to get men to take it up? So you've got your policy right, you've enhanced the pay, you're publicizing it really well. What's the next step?
What is tricky is, for a mother, we have to give our mat leave one form in and say we're pregnant to our organisation, but a dad, you don't have the same trigger.
That's right.
So for a mum, it's easy to communicate your maternity benefits and all the policies that go with it.
Yes.
You know they're pregnant.
That's right.
But as dad, you don't get that data.
Yes, so there's no trigger. It's the same with the benefit system, where it's not going to affect, And you couldn't force people. I don't think you could force men to tell. The women don't have to hand it in. They only hand it in if they want access to those benefits. Well, of course, the same could be so of fathers. If they want access to paternity leave and parental leave, of course they have to notify HR, right? So there'd be no reason why that man wouldn't. The other way you do it, of course, would be to have the main third, as it were, tranche of activities, if you like, is managers. It's training for managers. Now, training in companies these days is mainly done online. It's not difficult. You would look at attitudes. You would look at feeding them some information as to how it benefits the company when men take leave. How does it benefit a company when men take leave? Yes?
Isn't there a risk that if, for example, male manager is sitting in front of the screen, undertake the training, and we'll just skip that section because it's not of interest? I'm bringing this up because I'm teaching on HR course
Yeah.
at uni, and I've had this that HR mostly female students, but I had male students getting up, leaving the room because they thought, this is not really something I'm interested in.
Yes. So, I suppose you just make it part. You can't sign off that they've done the course until they've answered the questions on it. I don't imagine it would be difficult, would it? No, exactly. So you don't sign it off. So that's a management issue, isn't it? You see? So it's the managers that you've got to get those systems right. Absolutely. Then you've got to make sure they're collecting the data on take-up by gender. I was at a company in the city the other day and they said, we had 2 people take parental leave this year. I said, women or men? They went, oh. And then they went and looked it up while I was there. They did have the data. And they said, it's women. Yes? So for all those kind of things, take up of flexible working, we want to know why, at what ages they're taking it up, so that, you can look at flexible working data and think, equal numbers of men and women in our organisation are taking it. But then you find out the women are taking it around age 30 for childcare, and that's scuppering their careers, and the men are taking it 45. The numbers are the same. Yeah. So that's it. So I'm going to finish in a minute. New opportunities. Okay. So, the Women's and Equality Select Committee, Maria Miller, Conservative MP who really gets it, and is backed up by some brilliant House of Commons employees who absolutely understand parental leave until it's coming out of their ears. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. They brought out a very good report in 2016, in the autumn. It's on the website, called The Gender Pay Gap, and it explored all the reasons for the gender pay gap and how we could ameliorate it, and a whole chapter is on fathers and leave. And they proposed this reserved leave for fathers, well paid, a matching leave of 6 weeks that shouldn't be just an extension of paternity leave, but could be taken in the whole first year, of 90% of salary with a cap. They're now doing an investigation into fathers and work, an inquiry. Same people are behind it. This is going to come up with a lot more recommendations along the same lines. So there's pressure coming, and these select committees can be quite influential. The government responded to the gender pay gap one and said, no, we won't do anything that you recommend. That's quite common. The Modern Employment Review, Matthew Taylor is carrying out. I don't know how he's going to address self-employed people and parental leave. We're not sure yet. I've got to send him some documents, which I hope will help. We've got the government evaluation of shared parental leave. There shouldn't be a second bullet point there. And flexible working policies is going on at the moment, and they hope to address that in 2018, 2019 to make it a topic for the next general election. We think there will be a campaign with the Fawcett Society, Fatherhood Institute, and others, I should imagine, working families, at the run-up to the next election. Everyone is now agreed, I think, just about on this whole idea of a reserved leave for fathers that's well paid in parallel with the mothers. You don't take it off maternity leave. You cannot do that in this country. What you do is try to incentivize the families for the fathers to take it by making an element of that non-transferable leave well paid. And 2018, government is to review the parenting leave design. So that's where we are now, and thank you very much for listening.